Before we get into the video, I just want to give a big shout out to Amazon and the Amazon Appstore for sponsoring this video. And I'd like to tell you a bit about the upcoming new game, Echoes of Mana, which will be available on all app stores, including the Amazon Appstore. And the Amazon Appstore is the absolute best place to pre-order and download the game because right now they are running a special promotion in celebration of the launch of Echoes of Mana. If you spend $100 or 10,000 Amazon coins, you will get 1,000 coins back. That's right, just a straight up rebate that you can use for even more rolling. And if you do as much rolling as I do, that's a pretty good deal. All you need to do to take advantage of this offer is to download the Amazon App Store on your Android phone, install Echoes of Mana, make an account, and then purchase 10,000 Amazon coins to get those 1,000 coins back. I'll include a link in the description and pinned comment down below to the Amazon store page, which outlines the entire process. Now for those of you who aren't in the know, if Echoes of Mana sounds familiar to you, it should, because it's the latest release in the Mana series from Square Enix, which has been producing classic JRPG hits like Secrets of Mana and Trials of Mana since the SNES days. And Echoes of Mana will not only feature fan-favorite characters from all of the Mana games, but also retains the absolutely beautiful and unique art style that the series is known for. As you can see from the trailer, the game looks great and it has that classic JRPG feel. So if you're a fan of the Mana series or you just love JRPGs in general, I highly recommend heading on over to the Amazon App Store and pre-ordering Echoes of Mana. I already have. And again, the link to all of this is in the description and pinned comment down below, so please do check those out. But now, on to the video. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here with a video that I honestly meant to get out months ago, but better late than never I suppose. FGO JP has been pumping out some major strengthening quests lately, and those have seriously tilted the power levels of some servants, looking at you Ivan and Tesla. So I thought it'd be a fun idea to maybe take a look at some of the SSR servants that I think are most likely to get a buff to help them out this year, and also give some speculation as to what kind of buff I think would be best for them. So I guess you can kind of treat this video as my predictions for which 5 stars I think might get a buff this year. And as always, if you're looking forward to my predictions, please do consider subscribing to the channel and ringing that bell, since it does help out a lot and you can stay up to date with all of my FGO content as it comes out. And with that said, let's take a look at the list. First up on my pick of likely to be buffed servants is the king of traps himself, Astolfo. Now there are a couple of reasons why I think this buff can happen. For one, we're curiously lacking an Extella event, and with Charlemagne being such a popular and highly requested servant, I really wouldn't be surprised if we got an Extella collab this year, or maybe a Knights of Charlemagne event. And of course, such an event would be the prime opportunity to buff everyone's favorite bunny boy. The other reason is because SSR Sabers are a very popular target for strengthening quest campaigns, and Astolfo hasn't received one in a while. There's also been an uptick in the amount of quick servants releasing lately, which leads me to believe that there is a focus on buffing the quick meta. So all of those factors make Astolfo a prime target, and lucky for him, there is one easy quick fix that will make him much more competitive. And that fix is buffing his third skill, Majestic Triumphal Return, so that it increases star absorption on all of his cards for 3 turns, not just his buster card. This would immediately make Astolfo a much more viable crit DPS, since his star absorb skill would have a much higher uptime, which would help compensate for his low NP gain. Rather than having to rely on inconsistent crits and a slow NP charge, he could solidly focus on being a pure crit DPS for quick teams. It also synergizes very nicely with Scotty's recent buff, which increases the party's crit damage. This buff is an absolute no-brainer, and I imagine that we'll get it sooner rather than later. Oh, and while we're on the topic of Charlemagne's Knights, my next pick for SSR that should get a buff is Bradamante. Much like Astolfo, a buff for her would probably coincide with some kind of Extella or Charlemagne event. However, unlike Astolfo, Bradamante has never received a strengthening quest, so I think she's definitely due for one, especially now that she's fallen so far behind other AoE Lancers like Aresh, Vitra, and Ryoma, who are all just flat out better. Bradamante is a victim of some heavy power creep, so she'll need a buff to help her compete and set herself apart. Now, I don't think she'll ever be good enough to compete with the other AoE Lancers when it comes to farming, at least not just from one buff, but one area that she can set herself apart in is her utility. I'd like to see her role as an offensive support expanded upon by upgrading her Noble Phantasm, raising the stun chance from 60% to 80%, and adding an additional effect of removing all enemy buffs would give a ton more utility to Bradamante, as well as some additional damage, so that she can hold out her own for both farming and DPS. Now, this buff would by no means make her top tier, but it would definitely help modernize her kit and give her a niche as a Lancer that focuses on debuffing and stalling enemies. Okay, no more Extella or Charlemagne related servants, I swear. However, we haven't left the land of quick servants just yet. Like I mentioned, there is an increased focus on rolling out powerful new quick servants in JP recently, so I have a feeling that we'll be seeing some upgrades to other major quick supports as well, namely Osakabe Hime. Osakabe gets overlooked a lot, but she's actually a good, if highly niche, crit support. She already has a lot of skills in her repertoire that make her a strong support in quick crit teams, including a party-wide 50% crit buff. But one thing that she is lacking is consistent star generating. I'd like to see her second skill upgraded to include a star bomb effect that generates 20 to 30 crit stars. This way, servants will be able to make immediate use of her crit damage buff from turn 1. It would also help if the NP charge and star generating buffs became party-wide rather than targeted, just to help out a bit more with farming and to continuously generate crit stars on subsequent turns. It would also allow Osakabe Hime to charge her own Noble Phantasm and provide additional card buffs right away. In other words, this buff would make it easier for crit servants to snowball quickly rather than start out slow and need setup. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Summer Abbey, isn't this just Oni copium? Yes it is. I am 100% coping, but it is my video, so let me indulge in my fantasy, thank you very much. That said, a buff to Summer Abigail isn't impossible. We have had Summer Servants buffed before, even if it is rare. Furthermore, Lysango doesn't typically like it when SSR servants are so dramatically underpowered, especially if they belong to an extra class. Think of Avenger Nobu, for example, who has received a lot of support since her initial release. OG Abigail has also received a strengthening quest recently, so it's possible that her summer variant is on the radar as well. And it isn't like Summer Abbey would be difficult to fix. She is, after all, a buster servant with a 50% NP charge. So there is one surefire way to make her much better, and that's by upgrading her NP. Summer Abbey has a lot of weaknesses, so one buff won't be enough to fix her completely, but it can be a significant start. Upgrading her NP can fix her biggest issue, which is her poor damage. She doesn't have any self-damage buffs, and her defense lowering debuffs are all bafflingly single target, which means that she can never maximize her damage as an AoE servant. So the best way to address this is by adding on buffs to her Noble Phantasm. In addition to the increased damage from the bolstered NP modifier, Summer Abbey should get a 30% buff to buster damage, and the defense down effect should activate before damage is done rather than after. This way, she gets a makeshift mana burst whenever she Noble Phantasms. Essentially, she'll have a 50% buff to her NP damage, which I think is fair given that foreigners aren't exactly powerhouse damage dealers to begin with. The extra damage can really help her out with farming, especially in Vich and Oberon comps, and it would make her overall much more viable as a farmer. And finally, the servant who I think is most likely to get a buff this year is Tamamo, the OG superstar art support. Now, don't get me wrong, of all the servants on this list, I think Tamamo is by far in the best spot. She doesn't even really need a buff. Sure, Castoria exists, but Tamamo is still a top support in the game. She has an overpowered buff, amazing stall potential, and incredibly versatile cooldown reduction that will single-handedly always make her relevant. That said, if there is one thing I know about FGO and Lysango, it's that they love to buff servants who don't need it because they're fan favorites. Isn't that right, Emiya, and Artoria, and Scotty, and Rhaenys, and, well, you get the point. Tamamo is a prime candidate for another buff exactly because she's a popular character who is strong without being OP, combined with the fact that she hasn't received a buff in a long time, and we still have lots of Tamamo lore left to explore, including possible events. Oh, and also, her seal was broken in Japan recently, so if that isn't a divine sign pointing towards a Tamamo buff, I don't know what is. As for what could be buffed on Tamamo, it goes without question that her shapeshift skill is overwhelmingly likely to receive the upgrade, because it's the only skill in her kit that hasn't been buffed yet, and it is extremely outdated. I think you can actually give this skill a significant buff in order to upgrade it, and make Tamamo feel like a more current meta art support. So I would suggest adding a 50% NP charge on it, and making it targetable so that it applies all of the effects to a targeted ally. Now I know this sounds OP on paper, and it kinda is, but keep in mind that a 50% NP charge is kind of the standard for top tier supports now. Scotty, Reynes, Waver, Castoria, all of them have 50% NP charge skills, so this isn't anything new. The added touch of increasing an ally's defense can also help expand Tamamo's role as a more stally and defensive support. It would give very strong survivability to an ally, and it would help synergize very well with Tamamo's healing, since she could basically mitigate both oncoming damage and heal her allies back up to full whenever she needs. Plus, this buff wouldn't make Tamamo a direct competitor with Castoria. Castoria would still be overwhelmingly better for farming teams due to her stronger offensive buffs and her better NP battery, but it would make Tamamo a much more viable alternative to Castoria in challenge quests, because she would have a stronger defensive skill set that would still allow for sufficient NP looping. Plus, it would mean that new players and free-to-play players would have another chance to draw a top-tier farming support from the standard gacha pool or from a free SSR ticket besides just Waver. And those are my predictions for which SSR servants I think are likely to get buffs this year. This was a different video than what I usually make since it was more speculative than analysis, but if you enjoyed it and you want to see more of this type of video, please do leave a like and consider subscribing. Also, let me know what your top 5 predictions are for SSR buffs in the coming year in the comments down below. And until next time, this is Soberoni signing out. Later.